Welcome back to Two Nobodies, everyone. Rupesh is here again. You know, on this podcast, we've talked about the fourth industrial revolution. We've talked about this topic because we know it's happening right now. It's so disruptive. We know the economy is going to transform. We know our politics is probably going to transform. Everything is moving and shifting right now. Our economy right now is largely based on a capitalistic society. And so we have a guest that's really timely that we can hopefully talk to about this, and maybe we can tie this into the fourth industrial revolution and see how the economy is shifting, and maybe there needs to be a pivot towards how it can help more people, or maybe there's some real benefits to capitalism. We're going to start to uncover some of this with our next guest. Kit Webster has joined us. He's written a book called Capitalism is Past, It's Sell by Date. Kit, welcome to Two Nobodies. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us on a weekend. It's always not the best time to record for people, but I appreciate your time.
Glad to be here.
Thanks, Kit. So before we get into your book, it's always nice to get to know people. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you kind of came to the book, but just more about yourself first so the audience has a sense of who you are.
Well, I live in Austin, Texas, in the U.S. Married with we've had two sons. I have a master's in electrical engineering degree, and I'm also a certified public accountant. I've spent or chartered accountant for European and other audiences. I have I have a fascination basically with human nature. So I covered the technical parts of my life with my electrical engineering degree. But I wanted to understand more about the crazy human beings. And so I've spent decades reading history, philosophy, religion, psychology, in an attempt to try to figure out the way humans behave, the way history progresses, particularly cycles. And as a result of that, in early 1990s, I started putting all this together and creating a view of the future. And the future was that the world and the United States in particular was going to reach a crisis in the early 2000s. And that crisis would be multidimensional because all things really are connected. And I began developing those concepts, and I've been developing them now since then. And they've evolved. Later in the 1990s, I read the book The Fourth Turning, and by Strauss and Howe. It had a huge effect on me. They are discussing some of the same things I'm discussing. They discuss them in terms of generations, I think, like millennials and boomers, and I don't do that. But their basic thought and my thought is that we take the world too far, we go too far, we take everything to extremes, and then there has to be a period where there's a sorting out and a rebuilding and a restructuring of not only the minor things of life, but the culture and the economy as well. And so I've been developing those along the way. A little bit strange. I write books to understand what I think. And so the great financial crisis occurred, and I wrote a book, not for publication, on the great financial crisis, so I could understand it fundamentally, not the sound bites, not the popular stuff, but what really went on under the covers. Then I got to global warming. I did the same thing. I wrote a book on global warming. Again, I think global warming has gotten to be so politically correct that it's really hard to find the truth. So I went digging. I went digging for it. Everything from conservative to liberal to outrageous. Lots and lots of scientific papers, lots and lots of books, and I came to my views on global warming. as part of that, um, I kept on running into this. I kept on saying, well, there's other things we need to deal with, but here's global warming. There are other
Right.
things we need to deal with, and sooner or later I had to deal with those other things. And I
Mm.
came to the conclusion that global warming was a symptom of a deeper problem. And that
Mm.
deeper problem is sustainability.
Mm.
So then why are we now not? So we're going to get to the end of the progression here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are we not sustainable? It's because fundamentally that capitalism has been too successful. It has been
Mm.
so successful in allowing us to create humans and goods and to exploit the earth's resources that we're now to the point that we're unsustainable.
Right.
Hence the book.
I want to get into all of that, but before, you said something interesting. You said, as these kind of crises or events have unfolded for yourself, you chose to write them down, to write a book. Now, these were for yourself, I imagine, or did you publish these?
The first two books were not published, and of course I have published this book on capitalism.
Yeah. So interesting. Like that's an interesting way for you to process things. Like this need to write it down and to dig deep and to cover it. Like most people might just read about it and hold it in their head, but you needed to write a book. That's I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, it's a little strange, but it's because if you're just talking or if you're even if you're thinking, it's easy to hand wave. It's easy to say, well,
Yeah.
of course we can handle this, or this is easy, or of course humans will behave this way.
Right.
And what you really need to do is say, okay, why? What's going to cause that? Where did it come from? How is it manifesting itself now? How is it probably going to manifest itself in the future? And
Yeah.
so it's a way for me to really take all the threads and dig down. This book that I'm publishing now on capitalism has, I don't know how many now, it's like 300 footnotes. The
Mm.
point being that it's based on data, it's based on
Mm.
research, it's not based on, oh, I'm a capitalist, I'm a socialist, I'm from the
Right.
United States, of course things are going to be
Right.
great. No, no, no. We have to
Yeah.
decide what are the strengths and weaknesses, and really, really importantly, what are the trade offs?
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about like sustainability and growth. I mean, Austin is really booming these days. Like, what are your feelings on how quickly Austin is growing, and is it sustainable, and are people who have been there for such a long time appreciating this amount of growth, or are people kind of like, hold on a second, this is a little too fast?
Trade offs, trade offs, trade offs. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we got here in 1984,
Okay.
and so it was literally a backwater. It had it has a state capital, of course, in the University of
Yeah.
Texas,
Yeah.
and that was about it.
Yeah.
It was a little bitty sleepy town uh, for the United States, very liberal hippie place,
Mm.
and so over the decades that I've been here, it's exploded. It's now for in some contexts like India and China, this isn't particularly remarkable, but for the
Mm.
United States, it now has over 1 million people, and it's becoming expensive to live here.
Mm.
I take a different view on all this. I think that the growth is good and bad. We've got crowding, we've got homelessness, we've got crime, we've got opportunities, we've got arts, we've got things that weren't available when you don't have the resources. The
Mm.
fundamental issue, looking at Austin from my viewpoint, from the sustainability viewpoint, from the capitalist viewpoint, we don't have enough water,
Mm.
and nobody talks about it.
Right.
And what we're right on the edge of the plains and the desert. And
Mm.
we're saved because we're also close to the Gulf of Mexico and the
Mm.
Gulf of California. So moisture can come in here.
Mm.
And it's okay. But what happens is every 5 years or decade, we have these pretty significant droughts. And
Mm.
what happens is we begin to run out of water. Well, the last one was several years ago, and we ran out of water. And we've got 100,000 more people now, and
Yes.
and that's the issue with Austin. Is that, to me, you can talk about growth, you can talk about crime, you can
Hmm.
talk, but it's basically not a sustainable place because it doesn't have sufficient water.
Yeah. And so are they doing, what are they doing about that?
Nothing.
Like, are they nothing? Because am I wrong to say along the southernmost parts of, like, that's definitely the southwest of the United States, but southern parts of the United States, access to water is pretty limited these days, right?
It's limited for a whole list of reasons. One
Yeah.
is there's a huge drought going on now in the
Yeah.
western and southwestern United States. It's gotten to us. We're in mild drought.
Mm.
Uh, Rain's coming this weekend, so that's good. But California, Nevada, these places are in extreme drought. The other
Yeah.
problem is that we're using water in such a way that we're running out. Mighty rivers like the Colorado don't reach the sea anymore. We use it all up before it gets to the sea.
Hmm.
So we did that before the drought, and now what the drought is doing is making that even worse. A
Yeah.
problem that we've got that is shared by India, for example, is that a lot of our water comes from aquifers.
Mm.
And aquifers are basically, they're not really, but you can think of them as underground lakes that have formed over the millennia as glaciers melted and rainfalls. And
Right.
well, we're draining those lakes faster than the rainfall is putting it back in. So
Hmm.
we're basically eating our seed corn so that the vast Midwest, which is the breadbasket of the United States and in many
Hmm.
ways of the world, is based on these aquifers, and they are running out. So this gets back to this whole sustainability thing, and water is absolutely critical.
Yeah. I saw, I don't know if it was a documentary or something that kind of showed um, some migration projections where it showed the people, folks in the southern United States will start to slowly over time migrate north because, as you like, especially around the Great Lakes, because there's such a strong water source there, that might happen over time because of this water crisis, and that's just that's just scary, especially for us folks in Canada. I don't know if we want that many people coming up, but yeah, it's that's just another challenge for sure. Um, yeah, very very interesting how you got to that book. So what is the the essential essence of this book? Like, what's the message that you're trying to get across? And I want to we'll dig into it, but I'm just curious, sort of, when you started this book, what were you searching for, and then what was the essence of it at the end, I guess?
Well, I wasn't searching for anything. I was on a
Okay.
journey, and I was going to let the journey unfold. I
Yeah.
wanted to come in with as few biases as is humanly possible, and then let the data and the facts take me somewhere and
Yeah.
create threads that I could go down. And so over the years, as I did the research and the reading and the thinking, I did that. I explored, and it boils down to two sound bites, really. The first sound bite is that capitalism is past its sell-by date, and the second sound bite is that green growth is an oxymoron.
Green growth is an oxymoron. Okay. Let's start with the first one. What does that mean? It's past its sell by date.
Capitalism is fantastic. I'm not here to bury capitalism. I'm here to
Mm.
describe uh, what its what its impacts are.
Yeah.
And so, what capitalism is really good at is creating material growth. It's really, really good at discovering prices, creating competition, yielding profits. And if you take a look at the material well-being of the human race since the 1800s, since the Industrial Revolution, it just goes straight up. It is
Mm-hmm.
astounding.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really, really good. And it's been because of capitalism and free markets. Now, everything has trade offs. Capitalism has downsides. We can talk about them: inequality, uh, all, recessions, and all kinds of issues come along with capitalism. But if what you want is material prosperity for most people, the poor in the United States live better than three-quarters of the world. I mean,
Mm.
it's too bad that there are poor in the United States, but they're relatively well off. Once you take your focus off the Western world and think about humans as a whole, and that's one of the things I had to do when I started thinking about this. So you you wind up with the fact that one of my fundamental theses is that humans take all trends too far.
Mm.
They start off with a kernel of truth, and they build on it and they build on it, but they're looking for growth, they're looking for novelty, they're looking for new things all the
Right.
time. And what you do is you wind up running off at the end. And my classic on this is maybe female bathing suits, where
Mm.
in 1900 they were covered from head to toe, and now
Yeah.
you've got thongs, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, uh, that's not necessarily a crisis for humanity, but it's a trivial illustration of how we take things. And what capitalism has done is it's gotten us to a good place, and then it's gone too far. What it's done is it's gotten us to where we've have a, particularly us in the West, and that's where capitalism has been most effective. Although now capitalism with Chinese characteristics and other
Mm-hmm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
um, we have incredible lives. But now what we've done is we are consuming. There are too many of us consuming too much stuff
Mm-hmm.
to the point that we've become unsustainable,
Right.
which means that it's going to stop. And it could be pretty ugly when well, I think it's already stopping, but it's going to get uglier because of that.
So,
So that's what I mean when I say capitalism is past its sell-by date. It's like a bottle of milk. It's bottles of milk are great, and until a month later, when it's not so good anymore.
and you're talking about human nature. I mean, are you saying, like, is it greed that's really contributed to this, this constant progression where we just have no end to this? And like you said, it's past its sell by date. Is that the main human nature characteristic that you're talking about, or is it more than that?
Human nature is really complex, and in the introduction to my book, I produce a list of laws that I've come up with quotation marks around laws, of course, that I think describe human nature, because I believe everything is a reflection of human nature.
Mm.
There are no capitalists, there are no socialists, there are no corporations. What there are is reflections of bits and pieces of human nature coming back. It's very Jungian in that way. And so the the capitalism is not just greed, and it's not just hedonism. It's wanting good stuff. It's wanting a pleasant life. It's wanting health. It's wanting happiness. It's wanting to support our families. And so what happens is that capitalism enables us to do all these kinds of things. And so at base, it's a good thing because it allows us education. It allows us access to the arts.
Right.
It allows us travel, and things that humans just haven't had, and most humans today don't have. But it's got its downsides, and human nature has its downsides. And so the idea of a good life leads to greed, more,
Mm.
more. If you've seen Russian yachts
Mm-hmm.
are not in favor these days, but if you've taken a look at these things,
Oh
these
yeah,
are
football field. Yeah.
pretty amazing things.
Yeah. Yeah. The overconsumption piece is like, have we set up systems in place over time that has kind of just facilitated this overconsumption? Like, what continues to? Because I think, I don't know. This is just anecdotal, but it seems like there's a little bit more consciousness around our consumption, perhaps growing. But I also just wonder if the underlying fundamental systems in place just facilitate that overconsumption.
Absolutely. We have a culture that assumes growth. Humans existed up until, let's just say, 1800 for it. The statement is a complete overstatement. But humans existed for whatever 300,000 years with essentially no growth. And then we had this exponential growth, and the exponential growth has led us to expect it.
Mm-hmm.
Our children are going to be better off than we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a new iPhone every year,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and we're going to get bigger houses. We're going to have multiple bathrooms. The bathrooms are going to be the size of old living rooms. Excuse me, of old living
Yeah.
rooms. And it's just this whole expansion. The way I put it is that one is next to two, and then two is next to three, and
Yeah.
three becomes the standard, and so we go to four. And this is also the trend that leads you to too much, and the trend that leads where we overshoot basically everything, but in this case, sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if, and I don't know in your research, if outside of, the the Western world, those countries that are still, emerging, like those emerging economies, if they have the same kind of perception of what growth looks like as to what we have, I guess.
They've got American television, and so what they see is a refrigerator that's
Yeah.
stocked with food. It's, what? And you turn on a spigot and you get water, and somebody puts a cup under it and drinks it. You go into the bathroom and you flush, and it goes away. These are astounding things that we take for
Granted,
granted.
yeah, for sure.
And so what happens is that it other people don't want to be Westerners. I'm not saying that. Um, our culture, we've got a lot of downsides.
Mm-hmm.
People are very proud to be Africans, to be Kenyans.
Mm-hmm.
They're proud to be Indians and Chinese. That's all great. And they're going to be doing things differently. And they're not going to be doing the things the way the Canadians or Americans
Yeah.
do. But what they want is the same thing. They want a good life. They want a healthy life. They want to live to 70 or 80. They want to not have these terrible diseases. They want their children to prosper. They want education. They want to read
Yeah.
books. And so they may think in terms of iPhones. But I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but
No.
this psychologist Maslow put together a pyramid that he called his hierarchy of needs. And he says humans have to take care of survival
Right.
first.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they layer on layers and layers and layers until you get to self-actualization. Now, people down at the survival level can't even think about going to a Broadway play.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
They can't think of eating at Nobu.
Yeah.
It's just not there. But what they can do is think about having clean drinking
Mm-hmm.
water. They can think about having a motorbike and having gasoline or whatever powers their motorbike actually available to them. And those are the kinds so it's that kind of growth that they're looking for. And it's not necessarily our growth, but what they see when they look at American or Canadian
Mm-hmm.
TV is this is possible. Humans have done this. And so I can do this and I want
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably for sure. That's a natural thing. I know my family, I have some family in India, and I know that they've told me that, there's a lot of infiltration of a lot of American fast food and all that. And some of the original diets in India are getting lost, right? Like a lot,
Right.
and people are going to KFC, McDonald's more regularly. More people are working now, both men and women, or both, everyone in the household is working, so there's not enough time now to make those traditional meals. And so now kids are also suffering as a result of it. Obesity levels are going up. It's kind of wild. Yeah. When you approach this book, was there ever a need to now, obviously people talk about capitalism, and then the obvious is the other side of socialism. Like, was there a need to kind of explore on that end, and whether that is in any way growing, like whether people want that in our economy going forward? I mean, we're seeing that there's always that tension on the political side of things, but was there ever a need to kind of focus on socialism at all?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are two or three things to emphasize here. One is that we're becoming socialist, and Canada is much more socialist than the United States, because what we've done is we've mitigated some parts of capitalism by redistributing goodies to people, welfare,
Mm.
Medicare, social health, uh, aid for children, but also national highways,
Mm-hmm.
the space program. There are lots of things where we've gone outside the boundaries of strict
Yeah.
capitalism, and we're becoming more and more socialistic. Where today, I think that measured by proportion of expenditures by the government, Denmark, I think, is the most
Yeah. Yeah.
socialistic
Yeah.
country in the West. Okay, so it's a natural progression. And the question becomes, you've got capitalism and it's got abuses. You've got socialism with weaknesses. Socialists want growth too. They want their kids to have good things. And and so what happens is there's a tendency to try to find the best of each thing and maybe mitigate that weakness and create socialism. Socialism is perfectly fine by me. It's a
Mm.
valid system. Humans get to organize themselves any way they want. This isn't I'm not idealistic in this. I read a lot of history. I've seen how various societies have organized themselves. And most often in terms of dictatorships, actually, it's just completely overwhelming how authoritarian humans have been. But that's off the subject. Socialism's okay. But what you have to do is understand the trade-offs and look them squarely in the eye and say, yeah, that's okay with me. I'm going to be socialistic so I can have some goodies, but I can't have many and I can't grow much. And the only way I can grow more is to become more
Mm.
capitalistic so I can have more stuff to redistribute. And that's an irony. Capitalism is becoming more socialistic in order to be more fair, and socialism needs to be more capitalistic in order to have the goodies to
Totally.
redistribute. It's a really complex concept. So I definitely look at socialism because when you start thinking about the future, uh, what you see is so there's one of my laws, and again, it's got quotation marks around it, is that there's a social equivalent to Newton's physical law that says for
Mm-hmm.
every action, there's an equal
Mm-hmm.
and opposite reaction. For every social movement, there's an equal and opposite pressure back from another social movement. So as capitalism becomes ascendant, other things, including anarchy, but primarily socialism, are going to start pushing back. And we're seeing that now with the younger generations, particularly in the United States, sort of saying, I see all this bad stuff from capitalism. Where can I go? And so I'm going to look at socialism. And maybe they're doing a little bit idealistically without looking at the
Yeah.
downsides, but it's not a stupid
Yeah,
question.
yeah, and it's interesting how people just go to one extreme or the other. I mean, it's I always just look at it as there's a role of government in certain situations. I mean, um, the American military has contributed so much to innovation, but that required government spending to drive that innovation, right? And that's that's government investments there. The governments have a role to play. I mean, you wrote your was this book written? It would have been written during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, it came out last,
Yeah. So, I
November.
mean, I think in the early days of the pandemic, there was a lot of people saw there was a good role and value of government to play. Now, it's a little bit more of a controversial question, I suppose. But, governments, there is value, right? Absolutely for government investment to happen. And it's interesting how people can just go to one side or the other. And so I was going to that though, like did the pandemic itself and how you approach this book, did that influence your thinking at all?
Well, the pandemic itself, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about it. In one way, no, but in another way, it's an example of the expressions of human nature where we have lockdowns and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
vaccines, and you're infringing on my liberties, and it's too dangerous. And all of to me, the fascinating thing about the pandemic was the positions people were taking and the interactions and the opposition that arose. I'm not going to wear a mask. I mean, you wear
Yeah.
a mask, but if you're crazy, or I'm wearing a mask and
Hmm.
you're crazy, nobody stopped to sit down and say, well, what's the evidence and what's the harm? But it becomes emotional, and in particular in the United States, positions now get attached to political
Hmm.
parties. And so if you're one political party, you don't wear a mask.
Hmm.
And if you're another political party, you wear a mask as a
Hmm.
badge of honor, regardless of whether
Yeah.
it's a good
Yeah.
idea. And so to me, the fascinating piece is the human interaction, the tribalism, and those kinds of things. In terms of did it contribute anything interesting that I would have found interesting to my book, I don't
Yeah,
think
yeah. No,
much.
I wonder. I mean, we see the political tensions within the pandemic. It's bleeded into it's bled into society. And I just wasn't sure how it's affecting people's perceptions of how the economy and the economic model that we currently have, how that should move forward, right? Because you see this push for, obviously businesses have suffered a great deal, and businesses a lot more, for the most part, probably want all these restrictions gone, and so that they can just operate. And we've seen, Elon Musk as that example, right, of what happened with Tesla, and he's just like, I'm gonna have my workers just continue to work, and I don't really care what you kind of are saying. And so really pushing that free market mentality and less restriction. So I guess I kind of just wondered if you had any thoughts about how the pandemic has kind of shaped people's views of capitalism or socialism when it comes to the economy.
So let me paint it with a broader
Yeah.
brush, I think, because that's a good question. My fundamental thesis is that we're now under stress because we're coming apart. And we're coming apart because of economic stresses that have nothing to do with the pandemic, although I'll
Mm.
modify that in just a minute. This was my thesis, my views, my predictions occur
Okay.
pandemic or not. So what you've got is a system, and again, I'm going to be
Yeah.
U.S. centric here for a minute, where we've got opioid deaths. We elect Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders has a
Hmm.
huge following. Um, we're divisive. We have Black Lives Matter. We have
Hmm.
riots in the streets. This is not symptomatic of a stable system. So you've got this system that is becoming more fragile, and then you hit it with
Yeah.
a pandemic. And what you do is you stress it
Expose
even
it.
more, and
Yeah.
you expose it. It's the old uh, deal is that you find out who's when the tide goes out, you
Yeah.
find out who's swimming naked, right? And it's a Warren Buffett
Yeah.
thing, I think. Anyway, so what you wind up with is a stress on a system, and humans
Mm.
need scapegoats. So who's the scapegoat going to be? Well, I did not vote for Trump, but I'm highly
Mm.
critical of Biden. Uh, so he works for me. But capitalism is a great scapegoat because it's because the corporations are doing this. It's because capitalism is doing this. It's because the system is unfair and we need more fairness. And uh, and so what's happening, and now we're stressed because of incomes and lockdowns and those kinds of things. And I think, and let me take it one step further. I think this whole Ukraine thing, I mean, it's just
Mm.
piling on, right? I mean, because what's happening is we're now giving up energy security and food security. And over the next 6 to 12 months, all
Yeah.
hell's going to break loose. And there are going to be a lot of scapegoats for that. And this is human nature. And it's always the government, it's always capitalism, and it's always the other in terms of maybe whoever the other is, in terms of a political party, a race, an ethnic group, or whatever. These are your classic scapegoats. And so there will be increased stress on us because of these trends that were already in motion. They were
Mm.
going to happen anyway. But the pandemic and then Russia, Ukraine are just stressing the system and going to create untold
Yeah.
problems.
You started off this part of the conversation saying, you're focusing on the United States. All those things, Kit, are prevalent in Canada as well, and increasingly prevalent. It's there's a little bit of mirroring that happens sometimes. Sometimes there's a little bit of a late reaction. I forget how. I think Justin Trudeau. I can't remember how he said it. Essentially, if you guys get sick, then we cough like shortly after or something like that. But those things come to us as well. The scapegoating of capitalism is interesting because I think for sure there's I know you've recognized like there are some issues there, and nowadays sometimes it seems like corporations aren't always pursuing value. There's it's always with the bottom line, and and as if you're a publicly traded company, that's your onus to your shareholders, as it should be. But those companies that are pursuing value, there's something good to obviously say about those companies, but there are also a lot of companies that are just purely in it at all costs for the bottom line, the profit, where there may not be adding value to society, but maybe adding value to, some shareholders, and that's about it. And so I guess I want to just maybe slightly pivot to this. I don't know if it's an emerging concept or I'm hearing more about it. Is just like this conscious capitalism, social capitalism, that sort of thing. What's is that actually possible?
When I was going through my biography, I omitted what may or may not be a key part, and that is I've spent my whole life as a C-level
Mm,
executive, a chief executive officer,
mm,
president, or chief financial officer of privately held
mm,
and publicly held companies. I've been a free market capitalist
mm,
my entire life, and I've seen capitalism from the inside. I've grown companies. I've been part of startups. I've raised money
mm.
on Wall Street. And so I'm viewing this whole process as what I call a recovering capitalist. Um, Capitalism has evolved mightily over the years. The capitalism of Karl Marx and
Mm,
Charles Dickens, the sweat houses, working 6 days a week with no uh,
mm,
benefits whatsoever. You don't work, you don't get money. Uh, all those things, capitalism
mm,
has evolved. And it's evolved because the culture has demanded that it evolve. And so we have
mm,
benefits now. We have vacations. We have a lot of things that corporations do that's not pure capitalism. And I want to make a point real
yeah.
quick before I get back to your question, and that is corporations aren't necessarily
Mm,
capitalistic. One of the key characteristics of capitalism is competition. Com- Corporations don't like competition. And so what you see is maneuvering by particularly large companies to eliminate competition. This is
mm,
part of Google. This is part of Facebook. So I just want to note that capitalism can exist without the corporation, but the corporation provides a very nice vehicle to do capitalism, but there are
mm,
some issues there. Uh, so capitalism, yeah, capitalism can continue to evolve. The question is, what do you want? This gets back to my fundamental
mm,
trade-offs, trade-offs, trade-offs. Capitalism has created all of this material wealth and prosperity and increased longevity and ability to avoid disease. Uh, the vaccines for the virus are just
yeah.
miracles. And it's all because capitalism exists. We have this knowledge base, this capital base. We have all these machines and things that can, and all this knowledge that can do things. Anything you do to lower the profitability,
Yeah.
this is an
Yeah. Yeah.
overstatement that's not entirely true, but go with me. Anything you do to lower the profitability of capitalism lowers its ability to yield this material growth. Now, of course, in writing my book, I'm saying that's a good thing, but let's go with it for a minute. So if you want sustainable capitalism, if you want conscious capitalism, if you want capitalism to devote some of its profits and capital to things that aren't, it doesn't reinvest back into people or machinery or equipment, then you're going to get less. If that's okay, go for it. Because as I said earlier, this is about, this is, humans can organize themselves in any way they want. They can have any kind of capitalism that they want. There's just trade-offs. And so you can get, I was asked at one time, what's going to cause this change? What's going to get us to conscious capitalism? And the answer is that to me, it's complicated, and it's also as simple as consumers demand it. Corporations respond to their shareholders. They respond to their managers because managers want to make their money. But fundamentally, if they don't provide the goods that the customers want, and that's goods not only just the thing, but all the stuff, the aura around the thing, then the customers are going to go somewhere else. So conscious capitalism can be a competitive advantage. And that's kind of what we're going to now. We're in this early stage where consumers are saying, okay, I hear you. I want to address global warming and that kind of stuff. Make me feel good. And the corporation's saying, okay, greenwash. And we're not getting anywhere. But maybe this is maybe this is a necessary first step that gets us to the next step, that gets us to the next step. And if we are serious about conscious capitalism, we can get conscious capitalism. My assertion is that we're just not serious about it.
You said if people want it, like that's the way capitalism will kind of shape. But isn't like the deck kind of like we kind of talked about, the underlying system facilitates a certain model of capitalism? Like, isn't the deck kind of stacked against people to think in a more sustainable way? Like, people might want it, but at the end of the day, depending on maybe where you are in that little triangle model, you might not have the mental capacity to really think about something that's maybe more sustainable because price is an influence or something, right? And so the system seems always stacked against pushing towards the lowest price possible. And how are people supposed to even think about, conscious consumerism? Because it seems like everything is just about, something that's cheap and something that they can afford really quickly. And it's just, you might want to, but then everything in your face is telling you just to buy. And,
The system has been constructed to enhance and continue the system. So all the structures are in place, the institutions are in place, the laws are in place, the culture is in place. We think about growth. We think about these things. It's part of it's the old issue of asking a fish about water, and he says, what's water? Well, it's the water we swim in. And so your point is really important. I think there are 2 points, and this is the first one, and that is we're swimming in the water, and changing it is going to be extraordinarily difficult. The second is that most people live their lives from day to day. And you made the point. What's the price? How am I going to make it to the next paycheck? What am I going to do when the price of gas goes up? Another thing that's going to sound a little brutal, but if you read my book, it's unavoidable. And one of my laws of life is that half of humanity has an IQ of under 100. What that means, it's descriptive, it's not judgmental, it's just the way the world is. Well, what that means is that 80%, it gets more complicated, so I'm going to jump to the end, but 80% or more of people just don't think conceptually or analytically. It's not in their genes. They weren't educated that way. It's some combination of nature and nurture. So this has to be carried forward by a minority. But of course, all change is. All change comes from, 10 10%, 20% of the population.
Right.
Revolutions come from
Right.
10 to 20% of the population. What the revolution needs is not so much for the people to support it
Mm.
as to not get in the way. And so the idea is to get 50, 60% of the people to say, okay. The problem, what we're getting now is more and more support. And what you're seeing is 60, 70% of Americans support attacking global warming. But when you dig into it and you say, okay, great. So how
Yeah.
much will you pay every month to fight global warming? And the answer
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
maybe $25. So
Yeah.
it's a mile wide and an inch thick. And what's necessary is to continue to uh, have that grow. But to do that, people are going to have to see a benefit for them. And right now, the benefit that's being preached is we're all going to die.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do
Mm-hmm.
this or we're all going to die. And many people just react
Yeah.
and
It's too big
say,
of a it's too
I
big of a
can't deal
problem
with
for
that.
me,
I mean,
right?
that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
too
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
too big, too big. You know, I got
Yeah.
this. I got to get my kid in school. I got a doctor's appointment. Ain't no
Yeah.
death. Wait, what the
There's
hell are you
a
talking about?
you're in Austin, and there's a professor there. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe. I don't know if you know who she is. She's at the University of Austin. I
No,
think at the University of
no.
Texas. And she wrote this book called Saving Us, and she really digs into like the psychology and the social thinking around climate change. And yeah, that's a key facet of it. I definitely encourage folks to look into that as well. Um, yeah, where was I going to go with this? I was going to go with oh, I lost my train of thought. Around just economic growth and in general, like we're always focused. Like our happiness seems to, like, every time there's an election, it's always the economy is always at the top of the ballot. We always use these common metrics, GDP growth, all this kind of stuff, right? Like that to me also just facilitates this narrative of we always have to keep growing. Like I feel like we need a different kind of set of metrics. I mean, this is not a lot of people have talked about this, but like why aren't we focusing on something like the happiness index or something as like do you go into that into your book, or have you thought about that as far as how we measure, how we need to measure our growth going forward, and less being about actual production and more about a more holistic set of metrics or things that we talk about, like happiness, for instance, which incorporates not only the economy but incorporates our certain social factors, the political factors, like all kinds of different things. But I just wonder, like, how, in terms of how we move forward, I think the way we talk about this too, and the way we evaluate our happiness and our economic growth is also a part of it.
Extremely important. Uh, the if if the economy can't be robust, and at the end we can at some point we can talk about the need to
Mm.
reduce population and consumption. But what that means is we have to focus on something else. And so when you read the literature, people talk
Mm-hmm.
about social values and all these other kinds of things. In my book, I look at two measures. There's something called a genuine
Mm.
progress indicator, which is an attempt to take all the good things and all the bad things and create an index out of it. Now, that's
Yeah.
impossible, but they worked on it. And they came up with the genuine progress indicator that describes, okay, we've got growth and we've got prosperity and longevity and we've got pollution and
Yeah.
we've got
Yeah.
waste and we've got crime. And so you mix all that together and you weight it, and what do you come up with? And what you come up with is that, again, Western countries like Canada and the United States peaked in their genuine
Mm.
progress in the 1970s. In other words, by that indicator, things have been getting worse on net, on average. Now, obviously, if you're a Russian oligarch, maybe not so bad. But on net, on average, our situation's been deteriorating. The second thing is that there are various happiness indexes out there that
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
can Google and take a look at. And happiness for the United States
Huh.
peaked in the 1950s. And so the issue becomes, when you start talking about this deterioration, um, what you see is that things are getting worse around the edges, and we're feeling it. We're feeling kind of assaulted, kind of depressed, because we have this wealth, but we don't feel as good. I understand that. I'm an old guy. I look back at how
Mm.
my life was in the 60s and how it is now. And boy, have I got more stuff now. And I have traveled the world, and it has been an exciting life. But when I look around me, the 60s, before the revolutions and stuff, was just a very
Yeah. Yeah.
satisfactory, nice time. There wasn't all this fractionalist. We didn't agree with each other, but it wasn't life or death. It wasn't, politicians actually got along and enacted laws, and it was a completely different world. And when I look at those two pictures, I see the strengths and weaknesses of what's happened. So we have to do that. But again, we're swimming in the water of growth is good. I want more. I want another iPhone next year. I want more memory on my computer. I
Mm-hmm.
want my downloads faster. I want fast fashion. Uh, and that's just, I want more streaming services. And it's ingrained in us. And it's just a bad habit, like whatever bad habit, smoking or whatever you want to, you've got it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get rid of,
Yeah.
but you've
Are
really
there
got to
any
get rid of it.
disruptions that are happening right now that you feel are maybe contributing in a positive way to sustainability and growth and conscious capitalism?
Basically, no. I
Okay.
think everything's going in the wrong direction. But I think you made a good point earlier, where you said, people are starting to think about this more, and younger generations are thinking about it more. So what I'm seeing in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
culture, in terms of the zeitgeist, is that people are. It's become a topic of conversation that it wasn't before. In terms of momentum, in terms of the way the world is actually going, in terms of resources and pollution and those kinds of things, I think not. But in terms of attitudes around the edges, I think yes. And what's going to happen? I speaking of the '60s, um, one of the things that I predicted back in the '60s was
Right.
that marijuana was going to become legal. And the reason it was going to become legal was just simply that it was a thing in the 60s, and those people were going to get old, and it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have the taboo it had back in the 60s, and so therefore it would be there. Well, this is another analogy of young people are thinking these thoughts, and right now they're at the edge. But when they become in their 40s,
Yeah.
50s, and 60s, and they become to run the world, it's going to color the
For
way they
sure.
think about making decisions,
Yeah.
and that
Sorry
that,
about if you
and
hear the
that can make a
knocking. My
difference.
my daughter is kind of my 4-year-old daughter is kind of wandering around, so I think she wants to get in here. So
Ah,
apologize for that. No, that's yeah. I'm looking at the time and just there's one other question I wanted to ask you, Kate, was around just investing. If people can invest in a certain way that's a little bit more consciously, I guess, and whether you think there's any benefit or merit there.
well, I'm going to be very explicit to start off with and say that
Yeah.
ESG and greenwashing
Okay.
is garbage. Okay, it's virtue signaling. It's a short-term response to this kind of groundswell that's occurring. Again, it's probably a good first step, but it's basically not getting us anywhere. If you take a look at the companies that ESG funds invest in, they're the same as high growth funds. It's just they just call themselves ESG. So the question becomes, how do you invest for a future? And so I'm looking at a revolution. I'm looking at a revolution in institutions. I'm looking at a revolution in culture. And so therefore, I think that investing requires in my mind, I'm not an investment advisor. This is worth exactly what you're paying for it. But what my view is is that you need optionality. You need to be thinking not long term. You need the ability to look at a trend, take advantage of it, and pivot, and maybe even pivot 180 degrees. So we're in a time when uh, energy is just going to be, I think, for the next year or so anyway, and probably longer, we're going to be desperate for energy. We're going to be desperate for every drop of oil we can find. And so that's, to me, that's investable. Now, if your horizon of investing is 10 years or something, I don't know. I don't think so. So I think cash optionality, of course, cash is a problem because of inflation, but having optionality of investing and pivoting is going to be really important. I think that environmentalism is going to be overwhelmed in the short term by this emergency that we're going to have, this food and energy emergency. We've already seen it happen, and it's only going to get worse. And so what's going to happen is we're going to come down Maslow's hierarchy and say, how do we heat our homes during the winter, not what plays can we go to, and how can we help the ecosystem, and then as we sort this out, and hopefully we will, we can go back to
Yeah,
helping out the ecosystem.
no, that's a fantastic answer. Okay, Kate. Well, I just want to pivot now just to our final two questions that we ask all of our guests. I really enjoyed this conversation. Our first question is our five for dinner question. Dead or alive, who are five people that you'd want to have a meal with? I mean, if you want to have them together, great. If you want to have them separately, be curious about that too. But who would those five people be?
I'll start with Jesus. I'm not a Christian. I'm an agnostic,
Mm.
but I've been raised in the Christian tradition, and I have spent a lot of time on religion. And I just like to sit down with him and go through all the theological issues.
Yeah.
Why is there evil in the world? Tell me about the afterlife. Paul doesn't like homosexuals. What do you think? And just understand all the questions that have been a part of my Christian background. The second one is also religious, and that's the Buddha, Gautama.
Mm.
Uh, what a wise person.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'd say to him is, you've had 2,700 years now to look at how all this is unfolding.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell me, what you changed. Now you've got the eightfold way and all the things that you've got. Is there a ninefold now? Do you have a different view? And I don't want to harp on homosexuals. I'm good with homosexuals, and that's just not a problem. But it's an issue, and the Buddha doesn't say anything about it. The Dalai Lama doesn't like them very much. Uh, what do you say?
Mm.
I'd like to get the wisdom from what may have been what I consider one of the wisest men that ever lived. And then Aristotle. I asked him the same question I asked the Buddha. You've been around for 2,700 years. You've seen how your thoughts have unfolded. We now have a democracy, which you felt was not the what I forget where it is on your hierarchy, but it's like third, the third best kind of governance.
Mm.
You've got the politics, the metaphysics. Uh, what if you were to rewrite your great tomes? What would you say now?
Right. Yeah.
Give me that wisdom.
Yeah.
I think the fourth person is Cassandra, the Trojan princess.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
She had the ability to foresee the future. And that's pretty tricky. I don't know that I want to know the future, but there may be some pieces around it that I'd like to know. I'm getting old. I'm not going to live long enough to see how some of these things work out. And so
Mm.
maybe I want to know how it ends. My next one is, oh, it's John Wheeler or some physicist expert in quantum mechanics.
Mm.
I want to understand. That's crazy stuff, man.
Yeah.
I took quantum mechanics in college, and I've studied it on my own since then. But it's just such a weird reality. I need to understand more about not necessarily the equations because I got that kind of. Well, what does it mean to have that kind of uncertainty underlie reality?
Mm.
And so those would be the five.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, you said the whole you can't deal with the future piece, but I think, didn't you say like in the 90s you started really thinking about what the future is going to look like? I mean, I feel like there's some alignment there. So,
Gotcha. Well, here's the deal. It's actually turned out. I'm batting over 90%, and I hope I'm not subject to hubris. I've gotten most of the predictions right,
yeah.
but I've known that I could be wrong, and the amount of uncertainty is huge, and the data are not deterministic, and so there's always room for surprise, like the
Yeah.
pandemic. I didn't predict any
Yeah.
pandemic, although I did say the viruses were one of the biggest threats to humans.
Mm.
So uh, if you sit down with Cassandra, she's going to tell you what's going to happen,
Mm.
and this is the problem. Now she was also cursed that nobody would believe her, and so she predicted the Trojan horse, and she said it was coming, and nobody believed it, and so there you are. But now that I know that nobody believes her, I would know that I would not believe her, and it gets really complicated.
For sure.
But I have been you're that's a great point. I have been fascinated with the future, and I have been insisting on predicting the future,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been pretty right. But it's kind of like, do you want to know the day you're going to die? I don't know.
Mm.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's fair. Um, Last question is, beyond the circle of life, what do you know for sure?
What I know for sure is I don't know anything for sure,
Mm.
including the circle of life. If you're Buddhist or Hindu, they're off ramps
Fair
in
enough.
samsara and nirvana, right? If you're Christian or Muslim, death is basically not a thing. What you've got is not a circle at all, but an infinite timeline or string, and because you've got eternity in both
Yeah.
religions.
Yeah.
Uh, so um, I, when I when I think about your question, I am unable to come up with anything that I'm certain about. You've got multiple universes, you've got
Yeah.
quantum mechanics, you've got all these things that even things like the basic fundamental constants of physics can be true only for this billion years, and then
Mm.
they're going to. It's just so. Short answer: I don't know anything.
Yeah, you kind of got me on my last question there because I think I need to qualify a little bit when I say beyond the circle of life. I guess I meant in the physical being and realm, and not necessarily be beyond that, right? Like in our current physical vessel, we know that eventually one day we exit it. I mean, and then like you wisely pointed out, in certain religions, there's some sort of continuum that happens after. So good on you to point that part out. I appreciate that. Kit, this has been fantastic. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. It's an area that I always enjoy talking about and learning more about, and it sounds like you really dug into the research, and encourage everyone to read your book. Where can folks find your book?
Amazon.
Yep.
It's available on Kindle, and it's available in paperback. I have completed the recording for the audiobook,
Okay.
and so what I need to do now is edit it and get it to Audible.
Mm.
So sometime in the next few weeks, I hope the audiobook's going to be coming out. Uh, my website is www.pastsellbydate.com. There's a lot of information there. There's a summary of the book. There's reviews of the book. And my email address is try that again, kit@pastsellbydate.com. I will answer all constructive emails, and I'm looking forward to engaging in conversations on these things because I remain fascinated by them.
That's awesome. I've heard that just doing the audio version of a book takes some time. Like it's not an easy endeavor to do the Audible.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
it took, I don't even know how long, 40 hours maybe,
Yeah. Okay.
to do the recording and the editing and making sure that you've got it right. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, you're probably tired of hearing yourself by the end of this. I'd imagine. Oh, goodness. Kit, thank you so much again. We'll put all of Kit's information in our show notes. And Kit's, said it already, but we'll put more of his links and such. Encourage you to read the book and encourage you to reach out with some constructive emails. Thank you again, Kit, for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and look forward to maybe talking to you in the future.
I'd look forward to it, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us, and look forward to having you guys join us next time. Thanks. Bye.